show of a very next season here on Three Women. Welcome. For all of you who are listening, we're in a new time slot. Yes, we are. We sent the note out. I hope you got it. So we're on now 3 to 4 every Monday night, and we are live, which means you can be live too if you so choose. Just give us a shout at 416-946-7000, and you may want to, because we have two amazing gals in studio today. We've got, well, there's always me, the host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP, Parkdale-High Park. But we also have Chrystia Freeland, a Canadian author and journalist, served as deputy editor and weekly columnist for the Globe and Mail, has written award-winning books, and is co-chair of, or was co-chair before she started running again to be re-elected as co-chair of the Liberal Party's Economic Advisory Council for Justin Trudeau. And we have Miss Peggy Nash, was the chief negotiator for the CAW, now Unifor, was a founding member of Equal Voice, and was a finance and industry critic in the official opposition of the 41st Parliament for Tom Mulcair. So welcome to Three Women.
Hello.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
We were just, before we went live to air, we were chatting about the Emmys, of course, three gals sitting around chatting, and about that fabulous show, Veep, which is made by the same people as In the Thick of It and In the Loop. So if you're out there and you want to really know what it's like in politics, watch Veep, or watch In the Thick of It, or watch
a bit
In
of a
the
cautionary tale.
Yeah, a bit of a
And
cautionary
Borgen,
tale.
you could watch Borgen also.
You can watch Borgen. A
Borgen's
little
more
harder
encouraging.
to find. A little harder to find. You have to go download that or buy that one, I think, still. Although I think they're running it soon. So now to real life politics. A 3 freaking month campaign.
Yay.
One of the longest in Canada's history. What's that like for you, Chrystia, every day?
It's very good exercise. That's one thing I'm finding. The campaign actually started on my birthday, and my husband and kids bought me a new pair of pink running shoes, which I am sporting today. For the campaign, I'm finding that to be the most useful birthday gift I have ever had. And it is enhanced by the Christmas gift my dad bought for me with the campaign in mind, which is a red bicycle. So I find the shoes and the bike get used a lot. I feel lucky with the weather. My by-election was at the end of November, so it was getting pretty cold canvassing towards the end. So yeah, it's a lot of being outside, a lot of knocking on doors. I was elected in a by-election. This is my first national election, and I'm really enjoying it. I feel like this is a really consequential election for the country, and my sense from the people I talk to is people really get that. People are taking this seriously.
Now, Chrystia, I should say, is the incumbent in the new riding of University-Rosedale, and Peggy is the incumbent in Parkdale-High Park. Parkdale-High Park's boundaries didn't change, but this is your 5th election. Peggy, what's that like?
Well, it is my 5th election because we had a number of minority governments that only lasted a couple of years. So we had a much quicker election cycle than you'd normally have. It's funny, I knock on doors and I have flashbacks of all the times I've knocked on those doors before and conversations I've had. I met a woman the other night down in the Warren Park area, and I was thinking as I went up to her door of a conversation we'd had back in 2004 in my first campaign. And I don't think I had spoken to her in the intervening years. I think when I'd been to her door, she wasn't there. And but I did see her again recently, and she reminded me of that conversation, and it was really great to see her again. I feel like I have made some very deep connections, very deep friendships with people in our community. There's no doubt this is a tremendously long campaign. The longest one I was in before was 2 months over in the winter in December, January 2006, which was cold and dark. This time, we've gone from very hot weather now to autumn, temperate. And because it's such a long time, we also see a transition in volunteers. Some people, students go back to school, new people come back. So that's interesting too. You really feel the changing of the seasons. I just want to agree quickly with Chrystia that people do get it. People want change. They know what's happening out there, and I think it's a much more engaged electorate than I've seen in the past.
Now, Chrystia, your boundaries have changed, so you're knocking on some new doors. How has that affected it? Because this is, in a sense, a new riding for you.
Part of it is there's a lot of explaining to do. One thing that we found, I think it can be a mistake that politicos make is, it's your second question, Sherry, you're hyper aware of it. Not everyone is constantly studying elections or electoral boundaries. And so we found that a big part of our early job canvassing was just explaining to people the boundaries. And so we have on all of our literature a map, and we explain to people what's happened. I see the fact of the redistricting as a sign of success. This is happening because our city is really attractive and because more people are moving to downtown Toronto. And so we're going to have 3 ridings where we had 2. And that's how I talk to people about it. And it's really nice because people agree. People feel like it's a good thing that our city is growing.
Now, you both have children. Peggy, you've got grandchildren. Chrystia, your children are still quite young. People look at the crazy days you spend, which start early and go late and go on for months. And of course, that's just the election. And then if you get elected, you're in a different city and you're going to Ottawa, and your days start early and go late there, and you're not even close to Toronto at that point. How do you make it function? How do you keep any sort of family coherence going?
If I wasn't elected as a member of Parliament, I would be doing something where I'm very busy, because that's the kind of person I am. I've always had work where I was engaged, where I travel. So my kids grew up with this. My husband has a job where he has traveled in the past, where he doesn't travel anymore. But you said it, my kids are now grown up. It doesn't mean you don't want to see them anymore. I do have a new grandchild, and it pains me not to see him as often as I would like. But, you do have to also try to set some boundaries. I have a date night once a week where I see my husband. Occasionally we also just, our paths cross and we'll have dinner together, whatever, but we actually have a date night once a week. And I just try to carve out bits of time. I think for people with young children, it must be much harder because obviously they're more dependent.
And you have those young children, and I saw you at the Ukrainian festival with them. I mean, there are some events you can take them to, but how do you maintain contact with your children, Chrystia?
Yes, well, I have a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 14-year-old. And, it can be hard. There was a moment when I was in Ottawa before the election was called, when I came back at the end of the week and I felt it was just too hard on my kids. Something had happened, and I had a real sort of dark moment of the soul, and I thought, I cannot sacrifice my children on the altar of Canadian politics. And so I went up to the bedroom of my 2 oldest girls, the 10-year-old and the 14-year-old, and I said, if this is too much for you guys, if it's just tearing us apart too much, I won't run again. I think I'm doing something important that I believe in, but ultimately, I'm your mother, and that has to be my primary obligation. I was crying, and it was really nice because they said, no, we're so proud of what you're doing, and it's so important. And when we grow up, we want to have jobs and children too, and seeing you doing this. Of course, it's not always perfect, and if you ever come to my home, you will know our housekeeping is like the opposite of perfect. But it's really important, and we're glad you're doing it. So that was very heartwarming is too mild a word. That was a really important moment for me. And I feel like, look, I have tension with my kids all the time, and pretty much I constantly feel I should be doing more with them. But I also feel like at the end of the day, they get it and they're pleased. My 10-year-old now is doing government in her grade 5 class, and she said they're doing a special focus on the election. And she said, I think I'm going to do really well, and all the kids want me on their team. So that was very good. And I do want a shout out to one other thing, which is I do believe it takes a village. And for me personally, when 6 months after my first daughter was born, my mother, who had been a very active feminist and lawyer, retired and came to live with us to take care of my daughter. My mother died 8 years ago, but she has 4 sisters, and 2 of them have basically been taking turns. They're retired and live in Winnipeg and Edmonton, and are living with me during the campaign so that my kids have basically like a grandmother with them all the time, and I'm really grateful to them.
So if you've just tuned in, welcome. You're listening to Three Women here. I'm your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP, Parkdale-High Park. And I have 2 crackerjack females with me, both running in this marathon of a campaign, both incumbents, Peggy Nash from Parkdale-High Park and Chrystia Freeland from University-Rosedale, the new riding of University-Rosedale. And we're talking about, what else do we talk about? What it's like to be a woman in politics. One of the questions that young women always ask at places like Equal Voice and other places is, why and how did you get into politics? Peggy, you had a good job with the union movement. Why did you, walk away and run in this crazy thing we call elections? Why?
Well, I did have a job where I really felt I could make a difference, and that was important to me. As a negotiator, you get to actually negotiate improvements that make a difference for people, but it also becomes clear that you work within a context of laws that are determined by governments, and the social and political context can quickly change. And frankly, it was during the 2000s when we saw so many cutbacks, promises that weren't kept, downloading onto the provinces. And I got really frustrated that so many things we have been fighting for and working for were getting set aside in political decisions that were getting made. Also, I'd been someone who not only was a founder of Equal Voice, but had been doing leadership training for a number of years, encouraging women to play leadership roles in their community, their union, in politics. And when Jack Layton got elected leader of the NDP in 2003, he was urging me to run. And I thought, you know what? I keep urging other women to do this. Maybe I should take it on myself. So kind of a bunch of things came together, and I decided to jump in. And I have to say, although we're in the middle of a very long campaign and you start to feel it after 2 months, but I do often think that I wish I had engaged earlier and not waited to be asked. I think a lot of women do wait to be asked, and I wish that I had initiated running for office earlier.
And Chrystia, you had a successful career as a journalist. You were, writing books. Things were going well, and you threw it all up in a sense to do this crazy thing. Why?
I just want to respond, just say
Sure.
one thing to Peggy, which is, please don't underestimate the value of all the things you did before being a politician. Because I do think, as someone who also entered politics after having a long career outside of politics, I think there's a value to that too. Now that I've been in Ottawa for a couple of years, I have tremendous respect for my colleagues who've been there for a while and really understand Parliament. But it's great to have people coming in after having done a lot somewhere else. So my story, it's really interesting because listening to Peggy, that resonates a lot. And so for me, I had written a book about, it's called Plutocrats, The Rise of the Global Super Rich and the Fall of Everyone Else. And I think that subtitle tells the story of the book. And it was really about how in the 21st century, the global economy is changing, and that the technology revolution and globalization are creating this kind of winner-take-all spiral where people at the very, very top are doing better than ever in human history, but the people in the middle are getting hollowed out. And as I sort of researched the book and wrote it, it was a real kind of conviction book. I came to really believe we were in the midst of a profound economic change, as important as the Industrial Revolution. And that just as with the Industrial Revolution, you had the technological and economic forces that were very powerful and I think ultimately valuable, but you needed to have a social and political and governmental response to harness them to be positive. Trade unions very much among them. And when you think about it, like our modern social institutions, income tax, pensions, public schools, unions, none of that existed before the Industrial Revolution. So I got to the point where, and I gave a TED Talk about this, I sort of came really to believe strongly we need to do that now. So I wrote this book, I gave a TED Talk, it was translated into 17 languages. I met Justin Trudeau at the Toronto book launch of my book. He wasn't yet leader of the Liberal Party. He was very interested in the ideas I was writing about. We began to talk a lot about them. And then I actually happened to be in Ottawa giving a talk at a union event. And Bob Rae had told Trudeau a couple of days earlier that he was stepping down. And I guess, like Peggy, I did wait to be asked. And he said, why don't you throw your hat in the ring? And I sort of thought, it's one thing to talk the talk, but you should try to walk the walk too. And if you really believe these issues are so urgent, you should try to do it. And, I'm very, very pleased I did it. I don't regret it at all.
Now, you both are sitting in opposition, and Peggy in the official opposition, and you in the third party, Chrystia, and I sit in opposition at Queen's Park. I know what that's like. It's very different. Government gets its way, opposition gets its say, the parliamentary tradition. And I always, occasionally I wonder, women with these phenomenal resumes who get there, wanting to make a difference, wanting to make changes, and you really can't unless you're government. You can hold them to account. You can push back. You could hold out a different vision for a better reality, but you can't make the changes yourself. Does it get frustrating? Like, do you get frustrated? Do you ever second guess yourself?
No, I don't second guess myself. A colleague who has been in government said to me that the worst day in government is better than the best day in opposition. So I don't know. I hope I get to test that out on a first-hand basis. But I have to say, yes, it is frustrating when, especially this particular government, because they are so intransigent, so resistant to any kind of collaborative working. Even a previous Conservative government, albeit it was a minority when I was first elected, I did manage to make change for the first time in 25 years under the Investment Canada Act. I had led a campaign to block a foreign takeover of a Canadian company, one of our premier space companies, MDA, and ultimately, as the lone member on the industry committee, I got hearings. We put a lot of pressure on the minister, Jim Prentice, ironically at the time, and he made the decision to block the foreign takeover. So that was significant, and that was being an opposition member. Much more difficult with this government. But you can still do, I'd say, at least two or three things. First of all, you can definitely help your constituents any day of the week, and people really need help with government services, and you can make a big difference. Secondly, you can be a voice for your community, both in your community and in Ottawa. And thirdly, yes, you can hold the government to account. I think that we really held the government's feet to the fire around omnibus budget bills, foreign affairs, the loss of manufacturing jobs, the lack of fiscal transparency, and it at worst hurts them, but at best it does push them to revise how they approach things. So it's harder, but you can make a difference.
Chrystia, frustrating? After all the work you've done, and you got to talk at TED Talks, and sometimes you don't get to talk when you're in the Parliament.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, often extremely frustrating. And I would say for me, even being in Parliament has been a radicalizing experience. I do think that this government seen up close is even less attractive than seen at a distance. It really is, and the sort of, absolute disdain for traditional parliamentary democracy is really dreadful. Even something as basic as question period, not actually answering questions, but parroting talking points that literally have nothing to do with the question. Or instead of having committees be a place where you actually talk about issues, which is what they have historically been, having committees be just another place run strictly out of the PMO and pushing through a specific line and even specific language. And that is frustrating, but I would say even more, it's made me really angry. And, maybe paradoxically, inspired me more to really be delighted to now actually be running and to now actually have the opportunity to say to people, okay, now is our time to really change things. Now is our time to really, really make a difference. I agree with Peggy, the sort of constituency service element of being an MP is really important and very fulfilling. In my constituency in Toronto Centre, there were a lot of immigration issues. And we were able to fix things for people. The joke in the office was that my constituency staff were really fabulous. Never needed to buy food because they had so many cupcakes and stuff given to them as tributes for their fine work on immigration issues. And that's a really powerful thing, actually. You could come back from Ottawa and go into your office you sort of have a frustrating time, feel that you were asking questions and getting non-answers from Paul Calandra, but then come to your constituency office on Friday and have someone say their life has literally been transformed by this. That happened to me many times. And that really made me feel, like, we were making a difference.
Now, polls. Let's talk about them.
You're talking about the Polish festival in Roncesvalles on the weekend.
Not those polls.
And Ukrainian.
The other ones. The ones we all hate to love and love to hate. Right now, and I was just talking about this on another radio show this morning, it's as close as it's ever been that I remember it. We still have 4 weeks to go. That's almost a whole election cycle normally. But what does that do to your head, and what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? I mean, obviously we're dealing with partisan differences here, but what do you think? What's going on in the Canadian mind right now?
Oh, well, I think my sense is that the federal Conservatives have a core base. I see it in my community. We don't have a huge number of Conservatives, but people who have voted Conservative in the past, or who had said that they are voting Conservative in the past, have told us again this time. So not all of them, but most of them seem to be fairly consistent. But what has been clear, at least in our community for some time, a long time, is that people want change. They definitely want a change in the federal government. And it's unclear yet exactly where some of those people are going to put their desire for change. We're finding a level of enthusiasm in our area that I haven't seen before. And I think that's attributable to a bunch of things, but partly because we have not been this high in the polls in a month before a federal election before. So that is part of it. There's a variety of reasons. So I think there's still an undecided vote out there, and people are still mulling over what's going to happen at the national level before they make their final decision. And to be fair, they've got lots of time. Election day is 4 weeks away. So for some people, they traditionally make their mind up closer to election day.
Chrystia, what's going on? What do the polls reflect?
Well, I think that one point, maybe sort of Peggy's conclusion will be my starting point. It can feel for those of us who are in the process that we've had a long campaign already, and we have. But it's really important to bear in mind that by the traditional standards of a Canadian election campaign, we've just started. And I think a lot of people feel that way. One of my supporters, a very wonderful and brilliant woman who came here from the Czech Republic after the arrival of the communists, and who actually got her economics degree from the U of T. She's 81 years old and an economist, she told me very proudly. Took a sign, but she told me that she wouldn't put it up until after Labor Day, because on principle, she believed that the election should only be that long. And I listened to that very carefully from her. So I think we shouldn't feel as if people have been undecided for a long time. I think for many people, the campaign is just starting. What I am hearing in my own writing and from traveling across the country during the summer is this is definitely going to be a change election. I think that there are a lot of people across the country who are really fed up with this government. And for many of them, fed up is too mild a term. People are ready to kick out Stephen Harper. As to which alternative they will choose, I think that die is not fully cast. For me, and here I might be speaking to my own portfolio a bit, but as co-chair of the Liberal Economic Advisory Team, I felt a lot of interest and a real shift with the announcement of our plan for investing in infrastructure for growth and jobs. That to me, and again, I may be biased because that's something I tend to talk about at the doors because it's something that I had a role in putting together. But I feel that there's a lot of enthusiasm and interest around that idea and around that vision of maybe there can be a different strategy and a different policy for Canada going forward.
Well, we're going to take a little bit of a musical break and pay some bills. Again, you're listening to three women. We've Peggy Nash and Chrystia Freeland, NDPer and a Liberal in-house. And if you have any questions or concerns you want to address to them, I'll check my Twitter when we take a break. You can also tweet me at CHERIDINOVO or phone at 416-946-7000. We will be back.
But I'm banking on the deep blue eyes. said we love you madly, want to take you home. Oh, if I could have just one piece of that, I'd be so old. Come over to the sweet ones, baby, and I'll tell you where to go. I can't see them when they're walking sideways. I don't know. Come over to the sweet ones, baby, and I'll tell you where to go. I can't see them when they're walking sideways. I don't know.
And welcome back. That was Sarah Slean, Sweet Ones, and we have some sweet ones in the studio today. We have Peggy Nash and Chrystia Freeland, and they, of course, Liberal from University-Rosedale and NDP from Parkdale-High Park, talking about what it's like to be a woman in federal politics and to run in this marathon of campaign. And we were just talking about polls. Very, very even at the moment. I was going to say even Steven, but that would be wrong.
Even but not for Stephen.
Even but not for Steven. Actually, the one I checked at 308 had the Conservatives ahead a little bit today.
But even against Stephen.
Even against Stephen. Let's talk about issues going forward. And Peggy, we'll start with you. There's what you hear at the door, and then there's what you think is the critical issue. What's the ballot question of this campaign, do you think?
Well, so far, I think the ballot question is who can bring change to Ottawa. I think that's what I'm hearing most at the doorstep. But if you talk about, you break that down into a whole array of issues, I hear a lot about the anti-terrorism bill, C-51. It doesn't motivate everyone, but for those who are informed about it and care about it, it is highly motivating. Go the gamut, the economy, people not getting ahead, jobs, affordability, our child care proposal for a universal child care program is I talk to a lot of young parents who are really concerned about the lack of access, lack of affordability. The environment is huge, and I feel that runs the gamut on everything from air quality to our local Humber River that lost its protection under a Stephen Harper omnibus bill, to the need for more infrastructure funding, transit, cycling, the arts, culture. There's a huge range of issues depending on who you are, seniors, and the ability of people to live in a fixed income. So, it's, I don't know if you find this, Chrystia, but, you can go door to door and it can change house to house. It can change block to block. As you know, Sherry, our riding is bounded on three sides by railways. So rail safety is a huge issue in our area. The tank cars that crashed in Lac Mégantic went through our Junction neighborhood, and that's been a big, big issue for people in that area, small business. Boy, I could go on talking about the range of issues, but these are some of them. And, for everyone who cares passionately about, say, the environment, you've got another person who cares passionately about creating good jobs. I believe the two are interrelated, not mutually exclusive, but sometimes people just identify through a particular lens that they focus on.
So I'm hearing people are wanting change from your two ridings, and that makes some sense because neither of you have a lot of conservatives in your ridings. Ballot question, Chrystia, do you think one's emerging?
Well, a thing really interesting for me, being a politician and running in this long election is, as Peggy says, how vividly each voter comes to life in your own life as a candidate. And it is, canvassing is sort of this remarkable thing because you see streets in a new way. And you sort of, you see, okay, that house right there is really interested in the long form census. And that house next door, they're Estonian and they're really pleased that I'm one of the 13 Canadian politicians that is on Putin's banned list, and so on and so forth. And I've actually tried, as a former journalist, I just found this kind of such a fascinating
sociological study.
Texture that I've been trying in my Twitter
does it
feed.
skew you to go into a street where you didn't win it last time?
I won every poll north of Bloor. So in the part of the riding where I was the MP, I won every single poll. So that's nice. So yeah, and other.
But you've had to walk into streets where
for sure.
Okay.
For sure. No, so definitely. And the other thing that is so interesting is just understanding where people come from. So, I've been really surprised at the number of people. There's a very big Italian and Portuguese community in my riding. As luck would have it, I speak Italian. I went to school in Italy for a couple of years. And that turns out to be really helpful because there are a lot of older Italian people who prefer to speak Italian rather than English. So, that is all really interesting. When it comes to the ballot question, I do feel, for all this rich, multicolor variety, I do feel that at the end of the day, this is about the economy, not necessarily my pocketbook economy, although of course that's important, but economic direction and vision. And I think that what people are really looking for is an ambitious and realistic agenda for our future as a country. That's what I think people are really craving.
We had a listener tweet about what he sees as the lack of discussion about those with disabilities, Peggy, in the federal scene. What would you respond to him?
Well, there are so many issues that have not been part of the national debate, and I think that's partially because we're not having truly national debates as we have in the past through the consortium of media that normally host national debates. But even then, I think that so we're finding that people with disabilities are getting short shrift, a whole range, Indigenous people, the environment, women's equality. There's a whole range of issues that are not getting the kind of attention that they deserve. But, also I think that even when issues are when leaders do make announcements about issues, they don't always make it into the mainstream media. I mean, people with disabilities is a good example. We have huge numbers of Canadians who are excluded from the workforce, people who have disabilities, and they're excluded not because of their disabilities, but because of the barriers that are put in front of them. And so we need policies that remove those barriers. That's an economic issue as well as a social issue. I think one of the most difficult, and I don't know if you two have found this knocking on doors, one of the most difficult situations is when you knock on a door and you are face to face with someone who is on ODSP, the disability payment, and they're really struggling to get by. And the fact that they are so impoverished leads to depression and other health problems when they would be capable of doing some kind of work if there weren't the barriers in place. So, Germany has a requirement that workplaces hire a certain percentage of people with disabilities. I think at a minimum in Canada, we need to make sure we're removing the barriers and doing absolutely everything we can to encourage public and private sector employers to be hiring fairly so that people with disabilities get their fair share.
Another Twitter question here, Chrystia, I'll give this one to you. Elizabeth May apparently is starting on almost a lawsuit against Monk for not including her in the debate. Your response, what do you think about that?
Well, I am a huge fan of Elizabeth May's. In the House of Commons, she sat right behind me, and so I got to hang out with her a lot. And I'm really delighted to see in that first debate that so many people in the country got to see what I've seen, which is how smart and how thoughtful she is. I don't think it's my job, and indeed Justin Trudeau at an event we did this morning said, look, like, it's not the Liberal Party's job to comment on the legality of what the Monk debates are doing. But we have strongly championed having Elizabeth May in the debates at the table. She added a lot to the first debate. And Trudeau pointed out something this morning which really resonated with me, which is in the economic debate, his daughter watched it, and he said that she said to him, how come in this debate it's all men? There was not a single woman, including the moderator, on that stage. And that's an issue too. So I say, go, Elizabeth, go.
Now, on another radio show this morning, one of the comments was, but she represents a very small percentage, has only one seat, which I responded with. I said, well, if we had proportional representation, I remember a day when there were only a couple of Conservative seats in Parliament in Ottawa. Are you supporting proportional representation at the federal level?
What we've said is that if Liberals form government, this election will be the last election held under a first-past-the-post system, and that we will, within 100 days of forming government, set up a group to study what should be the other ways that we vote. Proportional representation would be one option on the table. The ranked ballot, which Ontario municipalities are using, which I've actually used because we use it in the Liberal Party in nominations, is another option. I certainly found, as someone who ran in a ranked ballot system, it created a set of incentives that led to a much healthier political discourse. Because when you're running in a ranked ballot system, it forces everyone to be civil. That's sort of how I kind of naturally am. I think my husband and children might differ, but I think that I am naturally civil. And, if you have a ranked ballot system, you want the supporters of your adversaries to think you're okay and to be willing to put you in the number 2 spot. So I see a lot of benefit in that approach, but I think no matter what, I'm very pleased that as one of our platform commitments, we've said if we form government, 2015 is going to be the last time we stick to this very traditional, very old-fashioned Westminster first-past-the-post system.
On parliamentary systems, let's talk about another one, the Senate.
Well, we think there's a lot of things that could be done to enhance our democracy. We've had a long-time position in support of proportional representation. We've had a long-time position calling for the abolition of the Senate. The Senate is something that's not going to happen overnight. But, as Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. So I'm paraphrasing, but we have as a goal to get rid of the unelected, unaccountable, and as Charlie Angus would say, under indictment Senate. And it's something that our leader feels firmly committed to. I think what really, although it's been a party position for a long time, what really cemented Tom Mulcair's passion around this was when we passed Jack Layton's climate change accountability bill that would have put hard caps on greenhouse gas emissions, would have made a number of changes to get us back on track for our climate change commitments. And it was passed through the House of Commons, and then it was defeated in the Senate. And I saw something similar in this past Parliament where we worked to get support for a bill that I had championed on recognition of midwives, and we got enough opposition and conservative support to pass the bill. We were very happy about that. And then the Senate just blocked it, and it died when this Parliament ended. I find that infuriating. It's one thing to say in theory the Senate has sober second thought. That's always debatable, I guess. But when you don't articulate any kind of opposition and you just willfully thwart a decision by those who are democratically elected, and you're soaking up hundreds of millions of dollars of public money that could be spent elsewhere in order to do that, I don't think that makes sense. And while it's not going to happen immediately, it is a goal and one we are determined to work towards.
Another listener just tweeted in, and by the way, if keep those tweets coming at CHERIDINOVO and AODA Alliance, by the way, says thank you for addressing disability. Didn't allow you, Chrystia, so you can talk about disability the next one. But another tweet was, give the LGBTQ debate a plug for this Thursday evening, 6 p.m. at Buddy's in Bad Time. So just so you know, it's going to be Craig Scott, the NDP incumbent, Liberal Bill Morneau, and Green Chris Tully will be there representing. So if you're interested
No conservative?
Surprisingly not.
Shocker alert, shocker alert.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't resist
So
highlighting that.
There you go. So so if you're looking for something to do on Thursday evening, if you're anywhere near Toronto Centre, that should be a lively debate, a really interesting one at Buddy's and Bad Time. So show up. Chrystia, do you want to just weigh in on the disability issue?
Yeah, so it's a platform commitment for us to honor and implement the UN Commission on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That it's a really important issue for us collectively, and actually for me personally and for our University-Rosedale Liberals. The president of my riding association is Hugh Shear, who is a really important and leading advocate for people with disabilities, and it's something we've worked on and talked about a lot at the local level. That UN convention is important, and it's important for us to live up to those standards. A part of it, and Peggy alluded to this, is making sure that we have a physical environment, a transit environment, a housing environment that works for all of us, very much, including Canadians with disabilities. And one of the areas that, one of the reasons that I am so proud of and have championed so much our big infrastructure investment program is that it would release funds to do that, funds to have more accessible transit here in Toronto, funds to build more affordable housing, particularly for people with disabilities. I think it's something really important to do. Building all of that can be good for all of us. And it's really important to realize that, people with disabilities have a disability, but that doesn't mean that they're unable or unwilling to contribute. They want to, and they have a great deal to contribute, and it's our social responsibility to create the material conditions which make that possible.
If I could just jump into around disability issues, it's not only people with disabilities who need that accommodation. I'll just give you a quick example. In our neighborhood, between the subways of Dundas West and Runnymede, there are 2 other subway stops with no elevator access. And we have thousands of seniors who live in the area. Not only that,
or someone with a stroller, if you have a kid in a stroller.
So having elevator access is kind of a basic accessibility issue that needs to be addressed. And I neglected to say that we, of course, also support the implementation of the UN charter for people with disabilities. It's a basic commitment that our federal government has neglected.
And it's something people have found, when you build transit or accommodation that works for people with disabilities, you usually find it works better for everyone. People have really found that with playgrounds. And playgrounds that are great for kids with disabilities, all the kids find them to be even better, easier to use, more engaging. And I think that's a really important attitude to have, not to create something separate, but to create something that works for everybody.
Here's another plug from a listener. Apparently there is a 5th annual Toronto Disability Pride March on Saturday, October 3rd, 1 o'clock at Queen's Park. Who knew? So absolutely, I'll give you a shout out for that. It goes from Queen's Park to Ryerson, and basically to bring recognition of the struggles and value of people with disabilities. So be there on Saturday. So back from the political to the personal to the political to the personal. What are you going to do the very day after the election? No matter what happens, what are you going to do, Peggy Nash?
Well, I always say I'm going to sleep in finally and kind of take a day off. That never happens. Anybody who's been through an election campaign, win or lose, there's always media calls, there's things to do, and you're so hepped up on adrenaline, you can't sleep anyway. So I always promise myself I'm going to just chill and relax. It never happens. But in my fantasy world, I'm just kicking back and taking it easy.
Now, is Parliament going to resume? Are we? Well, I guess it's up to the new government, whoever that may be.
Except in the new government, we do have a budget in place, so there's not an urgency to immediately pass a budget. But the machinery starts working almost immediately.
Yeah. So you're
on the move.
So if you're reelected, you're back in Ottawa. Bang.
Well, I'll tell you my October 20th fantasy. I have a very elaborate one, actually. So it starts with and I did this the day after my by-election, a sort of subway, not canvas, but subway thank you. And going back to one of the subway stations where you've been canvassing. And
you always go back and thank
people. I hope to say
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I did that after my by-election, and it was actually a really nice feeling. And people were very nice. It sort of felt like your covenant with your voters. So I'm actually looking forward to that, although I'm sure I will be very tired. And then Peggy mentioned her date night with her husband. My husband and I, because we have little kids, we have run and brunch morning. And we've been suspending those. So what
So
I
healthy
plan,
of you.
I'm going to get my husband to take that day off work. We will do the subway canvas. We have our little running route that we like to do that has the top of the Spadina steps, and we do the steps 5 times. And then we have our favorite brunch place, which is Rose and Sons. And then we will have brunch there. And then when that is done, then I would like, in my fantasy scenario, I go home, have a bath, and read a book in the bathtub. In real life, as Peggy says, there might be too much to do.
So it's been a total delight. And I just have to close. There's a story that happened when I was canvassing in Rosedale. This is a couple of years back, but I was thinking of you, Chrystia, because I knocked on this mansion door. And of course, I'm there. Hey, I'm an NDPer knocking on the door for the NDP. Didn't expect that they would be a supporter. Person came to the door and said, NDP, no, I can't do that. And I was amazed, first of all, I had a person and not a servant. It was that kind of house. No, can't do that. Way too right-wing for me. I always vote communist. And this was a $6 million house minimum. And that was years ago. So I'm sure you probably knocked on that door too. But
My
that was
favorite
an
line at
eye-opener
the
for
door,
me.
Sherry, has been someone who said to me very similarly, love you, love the Liberals, love Canada, but I'm afraid I am a Republican. And because there is no Republican Party in Canada, I always go to vote to make a point, and I spoil my ballot.
Until
there is a Republican Party.
I had a radical anti-feminist anarchist who said the same thing. I could not bring him over to the good side.
I failed with my Republican also.
Well, at least you haven't, or maybe you haven't had somebody come to the door naked.
Oh, yes, I have.
You have
Bill
naked?
Graham has a good story about that.
I've had underwear, never naked. You've had naked?
I had a
naked.
guy in the middle of the summer opened. He shouted, "Come in!" I opened the door, and fortunately, it was so bright outside. It was dark inside, and I just saw this figure drop to the floor at the top of the staircase. And obviously, he was expecting someone else.
That is a good story.
And on that note, we will drop out of here. The first show for the first season, 3 Women. Do stay tuned. You're always going to hear fascinating women in power, some who want power, some who have it. Always here on CIUT 89.5 FM. Do send in your comments. You can reach me always on Facebook or Twitter at CHERIDINOVO. Until next time, we also want to thank a room full of texts that I'm looking at, and especially Lisa, who produces the show. So take care all, and tune in next week, 3 o'clock on 3 Women.